Just having to go and win work, do work, win work, do work. After a decade or so of that, it's pretty hard. We need to take more of a software first approach and start to consider the hardware less. Well, to be honest, most of our big customers are asking us to turn AI features off. Enterprise businesses do not want AI features to be added to products they're already using. Doing really boring legwork, which no one really wants to do, I think there's a huge potential for AI to do that. You don't need 100 people, you just need 10 who really understand how to use AI very, very well.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Devico Breakfast Bar. Here we speak with different people involved in the business landscape, share their expertise, delve into the latest tech trends and explore the ins and outs of IT outsourcing. I'm Oleg Sadikov and today I'm excited to have Mark McDermott, co-founder and CEO at ScreenCloud. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss new episodes. Hi Mark, and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Let's start our podcast with a little blitz. I start a sentence and you continue.
Cool, sounds good.
Entrepreneurship gave me...
A release.
Okay. Entrepreneurship deprived me...
Oh, bit of a dark one. Or family.
My main superpower is...
Getting shit done, I think.
My main weakness is...
Overthinking.
When I'm afraid, I...
Retreat.
Sounds good. What inspired you to co-found ScreenCloud?
I was probably thinking about, what did it do to his family? Just the context on that one is that I'm 45 and I'm not married and I don't have children. And I think that part of building a business has been kind of part of that journey. It's very hard. So that's where that is. No one died. But I think there's certain sacrifices you make along the way. Anyway, sorry. Just in case everyone's like, wow, that was a dark start.
What inspired you to found ScreenCloud? And how did you identify the gap in the digital signage market in your company now feels?
Yeah, so ScreenCloud was actually born out of another business that me and my co-founders had already been running for quite a period of time. It was an agency design and build business, so designing and building websites, mobile apps, all that kind of thing. And we'd sort of developed a lot of skill in developing products for other people. And we decided to put that skill towards our own, to do that for ourselves, basically. So I suppose the inspiration was really that we wanted to stop selling our time and started wanting to actually develop and push out our own products, which would make money without us actually kind of just selling our skills, but kind of related to what we'll talk about later about outsourcing. So ScreenCloud was one of many products. The original idea was that we'd put all of these different products out, self-funded, bootstrapped, and then the portfolio of products would be what would make income. But then it was clear that ScreenCloud was going to be much bigger than the rest. And I think also, at that point, if I'm honest, me and Luke, who's the CTO, were both a bit jaded from just continuously building projects all the time. It is kind of exhausting. And David as well, I'd say. Just having to go and win work, do work, win work, do work. After a decade or so of that, it's pretty hard. So we really wanted to get out behind something else. And ScreenCloud honestly looked like the best bet. That's about as strategic as it was. So it wasn't particularly like we went out and analyzed the market and we just kind of happened on this idea. We're pretty good at building things. We saw the gap in the market, probably more at like the lower end of digital signage, that most businesses couldn't really access that for various reasons. We can go into that if you like. And we thought, well, look, there's an opportunity here. But I'd say probably as much of the drive came from us just not wanting to do agency work anymore as it was anything remotely strategic, which, I think it's good to be honest. Because most people, I think, would tell a different story. And I could completely lie and tell you a different story, but what's the point?
It doesn't make sense, yeah. How have you seen the digital signage industry evolve since you have founded ScreenCloud, and what trends do you think will shape its future?
Yeah, well, in many ways, I'd say the digital signage industry hasn't evolved that much. And strangely, it's very similar to the industry that I kind of came into and sort of wanted to disrupt a little bit. And I don't mean this in an aggressive way. I think that digital signage evolved out of the audio-visual industry, right? So it's not web developers that started this, because back in the day, that absolutely wasn't possible. It was very much a hardware-driven industry. And still, if you look at it, if you go to the trade shows, it's still very much a hardware-driven industry. And they're not talking really about web content. It's more like internet-connected screens, a bit of web content, but it's not really truly embraced digital, which is surprising given what it is. And so I don't think things have moved on as much as I'd like. But what I have seen change, I think, one, people understand digital signage more. When I first started, I say digital signage, people were like, oh, is that like signing, Adobe contracts, like a DocuSign or whatever? It's like, no. It's screens. They're like, oh, all right, okay. So I think it wasn't very aware, and I think most people sort of know about it now. And I think the other thing is, in our lives as consumers, we are seeing screens absolutely everywhere, whether it's in retail, outdoor advertising, quick serve restaurants like McDonald's have all gone full screens, airports, anything transportation. So I think as consumers, we are seeing screens like proliferate all around us. And screens, actually, the cost of a screen over the last 25 years has really dropped down. It's super affordable to have just a screen. So I think that people are seeing the use of screens more in their lives, and they're kind of expecting that a modern environment would have screens in it, and a less modern environment would have printed posters or something up instead. So I think the expectation from us as the public, as consumers, has risen. But I still feel like as an industry, we've got a long way to go. We need to take more of a software first approach and start to consider the hardware less, if that makes sense.
How has AI affected your industry?
Well, to be honest, most of our big customers are asking us to turn AI features off, right? So I think the first thing to acknowledge is that in the enterprise businesses do not want AI features to be added to products they're already using, because if you have any familiarity with enterprise sales, you know that you do these master service agreements and you come to these quite complex agreements with big businesses. AI has not featured in them historically. So I think there's going to be a period, and I think this is why AI isn't going to come as quickly as everyone thinks, at least into the enterprise. We're going to be forced to turn them off. And the reason is those agreements need to be updated. Now, that is a lot of work, there's a lot of legal work. Yeah, I think there'll be increasing pressure for that work to get done. Right now, enterprise businesses don't have to do this, or maybe they're doing it in certain pockets where they feel that they are going to benefit most from AI, which might be saying customer service, maybe in their development teams, if they have development teams. But I think AI is going to very much come in slowly on the enterprise until it's forced to move over. That's not unusual in enterprise. In terms of where I see the future of AI for us, I think it's very exciting. Most of the content that people want to put on a screen, it already lives in some form. It lives inside of a system, it lives inside of a file, PowerPoint, whatever it might be. But when you put stuff on a screen, you can't just put the same file up on a screen. First of all, you wouldn't be able to read it, right? You have to be able to read it from 10 feet away. Most content has been built to be read from like 1 foot away, right, on a phone or that. So AI can transform it. AI is really good at summarizing things, at like reducing content, at doing translation, maybe go multilingual. And I think there's a lot of potential for AI to take information, files, whatever it might be, condense it down and then put it up to screen. Because at the moment, that's quite a manual task that someone's having to do, and often not even really doing it. They just put the file up and then just hope people can see it. So I think doing really boring legwork, which no one really wants to do, I think there's a huge potential for AI to do that.
Many companies underutilize their digital screens. What strategies or advice would you give them to unlock the full potential of these assets?
I think that's a good point, right? I have never been into a business that doesn't already have screens on a wall. What we're seeing with customers is we want to use screens. We just don't really know how. It's not really a well understood thing. To be honest, there isn't even really a big brand name. I mean, ScreenCloud, I'm hoping, becomes that brand name. But most people have never heard of us, right? And most people couldn't name a competitor either. So as an industry, we need to be more vocal. Coming on podcasts like this and just talking about it is helpful because we want to get the word out, because people put the screens up. They want this. They just don't really know how. The strategies I would put in place is, what you tend to find is that like the screens are up there, but no one internally has really owned it. Like, who is responsible for these things? Because it sort of lies with IT. It sort of lies with internal comms or marketing or whatever. Where we find is that usually inside of the successful companies, there's one champion, like an intrapreneur. I don't know if you've heard of that phrase before, like someone inside who's like, I want to own this. I'm going to be the coordinator. And often working closely with us because they're going to need support and help, because there's a lot of different skills you need to make this work. We kind of make them this internal champion. And often our customers end up winning like internal innovation awards. Sometimes they get job promotions. Sometimes they actually get a completely new job, which is just like running all of these screens and then go into a global rollout. So I think it starts with someone who really cares, who can see the future, who wants to take responsibility. Then it's down to a company like ScreenCloud to support them. And then what is successful is, I think, is just to go and listen to the users. So who is the audience in front of these screens? Where are they struggling? And how could we help areas of their life be better by visualizing content on a screen? What we normally find is there isn't one answer to that. But inside of every business, there is this one annoying problem that if it was just more seen, more understood, more talked about, everything would be better. And we focus on that. And then honestly, there's a lot of other content, which is like nice to have content. It's useful, but you've got to have this kind of pillar content, this one thing which makes the screen super valuable. That's why it's so easy in quick serve restaurants, because what is the most valuable screen? It's like a menu board, or like, when's your order coming up? That's super valuable, not really promotions and stuff, right? That's what you really need to see. So inside of a business, you've got to figure out what's that one thing, and then work with us to visualize that. And then when people start paying attention to the screen, trust me, these things are viral, because they're like, well, if we're in this building, I want it in that building, I want it in that country. But you've got to have a hook. Otherwise, no one's going to be really that interested.
Thank you. As an expert in B2B SaaS space, what do you believe are the key factors that drive customer satisfaction and retention in your particular industry?
Right. Well, the key factors, if specific to digital signage or just B2B SaaS in general, I think specific to digital signage is you have to very, very quickly build trust with the customer. IT is normally the team that we're initially working the most with, because ultimately the screens are on the network, and if it's on the network, it's the responsibility of IT. Now, if IT get on a call with you and they don't think that you anticipate the needs and problems they're going to have, they're not going to trust you, in which case they're not going to back you and roll you out, right? So you have to build that relationship really carefully and deliberately from the very beginning. And normally that's just about anticipating the issues and the fears that they're going to have. Because what they don't want is screens go down all the time. You go to the airport, you see black screens, blue screen of death, all that stuff. That's IT's worst nightmare. So you've got to really understand that pain, acknowledge it, and then show how you're going to work to alleviate that pain and minimize the risk in the future, because they don't want to be the person responsible for rolling out something that's a massive headache in a year's time. So I think trust is key. And then honestly, it's kind of simple. You just got to listen to what they want. You don't necessarily have to do everything they say, but you got to really kind of like focus on the pain. We don't want to be selling just like aspirin here. We want to be selling proper painkillers. Like, I've got a little bit of a problem over here. Fine. I want to be solving major issues, right? Because otherwise, it's so easy for SaaS products to fall into like a nice to have category. And especially in like a market like we're in now, no one's buying nice to have products, right? They're buying products which are going to deliver business value back to them. So you've got to really hook into that pain and figure out what you can do uniquely to help solve it. And I kind of think a lot of B2B SaaS, we look at ourselves too much. And it's like the answer, okay, there's loads of good tactics and, processes and systems and Like, but ultimately, the truth lies with the customer. Just go and spend more time there. Also, the other thing, go and visit them. Actually get in their real world, not just do shit on Zoom. Sorry, I'm not sure if I should swear on this. But like, don't just go on Zoom all the time. Like, go in their world, walk around, understand them, meet further people, and just really deepen your level of understanding of what you're trying to achieve.
That's very valuable advice for many companies, I think. With offices in the US, UK, and Thailand, how do you maintain company's culture?
Well, with difficulty, to be honest. I mean, I think we've always been in multiple countries. So we were in Thailand and the UK from the very beginning. So in that regard, that wasn't difficult because we had existing teams. We always had really good ways of working. And when we were smaller, it was easier because even with time difference, like you can pick up pretty good ways of doing asynchronous communication and you get into workflows quite fast. Like you can use the time zones to your advantage, or they can be a massive disadvantage, but quickly you figure out how to use it to your advantage. And it just means you need to be more clear in your communication because you might be communicating to someone who's only going to see that communication when they wake up. So you need to be thorough, right? You need to be very clear, especially when people don't have English as a first language, such as in Thailand. That's just something you just learn to do. But obviously, culture, I actually would even argue you don't have a single culture. Like you have this overarching culture of like, what is the culture of what we do and don't accept at ScreenCloud? But a Thai interpretation of that is going to be very different to like a West Coast LA interpretation of that. And I think if you try and make everyone homogenized, then you're going to fail because like the very cultures that those people are from are so radically different themselves. But what you can have is this common thread, right? This common humanity, which I think is something you've got to hire against. You've got to really like maintain and be disciplined about maintaining that runs across all of that. But then I think you've got to also celebrate a bit of local diversity as well. And otherwise, but it's difficult and it gets much harder at scale. And it got even harder during COVID where we couldn't do these annual meetups. So we do this thing called ScreenCloud Together where everyone gets together in one location once a year. It's really expensive. It's really difficult to organize. but it's super valuable. And it just means that everyone is like breaking bread with people from different nationalities, different teams. And this really, really helps our culture. It's kind of like a cultural reset that we do once a year. And you really feel the benefit of it afterwards. But then lots of people come and go over a year, and more people arrive than go typically. And then you're got to do it all again.
IT outsourcing is a major trend in the tech industry. Since you have experience with both in-house and outsourced teams, what are the key advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing IT development compared to keeping in-house?
Wow, right, yeah, that's a big topic. Okay, so I guess let's start with the advantages, especially in the early days. I think it's actually quite advantageous to do this because growing a team when you're very small with limited budget, it takes a lot of time. Often maybe there may not be certain technical skills in-house. You might be able to attract a certain level of talent, or whatever it might be. So I think being able to like outsource some of your product build to another company who has those skills, who can kind of easily ramp up a team, or relatively easily ramp up a team and tackle it, and who's also, that team is kind of proven, it's not the first time they've ever built a product, right? Whereas for a founder, it might kind of be. You never know, like what their background is. So generally speaking, they can kind of apply a proven methodology, a proven team, and get to work fast and deliver. They're also accountable, right? Like, so you've suddenly got this extra bit of accountability, like one throat to choke, as they say. Like, if it's not working, you're like, right, come on, to do that. And whilst you're also having to do a load of other things in the early stages, such as selling to customers and things like that. So I think it kind of spreads your risk a bit, increases the accountability a bit more widely. Yeah, and there's a lot of talent out there in the world, and it might be that you're also outsourcing to a team in a country that you have no personal exposure to, right? So in our case, we actually used a team in Ukraine for about 2 years in the early days. And the main thing we did there is we were actually rebuilding our main platform with our own engineering team, and that the Ukrainian team were building kind of like integrations and add-ons to our existing platform, so that to our customers, it felt like we were still innovating on the platform whilst our core main team were rebuilding our new one. And I don't think they would have been able to do that without that outsourced team taking care of it. So I think there's some good stuff there, right? Ultimately, I'd say, though, as you get bigger, you shouldn't be outsourcing like key parts of your product. I think it does need to come in-house. I think part of the disadvantages then would be the people who are recruited by that outsourced company. They weren't really recruited because they believe in ScreenCloud. They were recruited because they wanted to make money developing software for customers, and then they'll find out which customer they're working on when they get there. So there's a little bit of a cultural misalignment, which is that developer hasn't necessarily fully opted into you. I think they do try and match, against interest and stuff like that. But the reality is they also need to get to work, right? So that's one issue you have. And I think when we had that Ukrainian team, for example, they were actually a pretty good team. I remember one guy once asked one of the developers, like, oh yeah, so why did you become a developer? And he's like, well, actually my interest is really in acting, but I need to make money, so I just became a developer. And he's like, oh, okay. And actually, if you think about it, where he's from, he's like, I need to make money, that makes money, it's not my passion, but I'm smart and I can do it. And you're like, okay, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But ultimately, like, he's not going to be going home at night thinking, what can we do? How can we make this better in the future? And there's another thing about outsourcing, which is like, everyone probably knows this triangle, okay? You've got speed, cost, and quality, pick two. Now, I would say outsourcing companies probably skew towards cost and speed. And that's probably because customers, especially ones who haven't done lots of product development before, they are the two things they care about. I want it done quickly and I don't want to spend a fortune. And so you're going to get high velocity product coming out of them, but they're not going to take that time to step back and think about the longer term perspectives. And this is what we found after a couple of years of doing this, is that suddenly we had this, like, a lot of code, a lot of stuff had been pushed out, but it was quite fragile. It hadn't really been architected right, it hadn't really been thought right. And whereas subsequently bringing all of that back in-house, this is the responsibilities of VPs who've been here or worked their way up to VP from like 5 years, just thinking about screens, only screens, not any other technology. And so I think it's not their fault. They're just responding to the market. But and as a customer, it's great to see product shipping. But then 2 years down the road, you've got a lot of technical debt. You haven't really been very strategic, and I think that can be a real problem. I'm sure all of this can be figured out, but this is what my experience is.
It will take time, resources.
Yeah, and also I think a bit of
Customer experience.
education of the customer. But the thing is, if you educate the customer, that might not be what they want to hear. So do you win the
Yeah, it
customer? Because I
affects
mean,
your
like,
reputation.
exactly, it's not easy.
How do you maintain strong company culture within outsourced teams?
So I actually think we did a reasonably good job of this when we did have our team in Ukraine. So firstly, we treated them like our own, right? So even though, the way that it was being billed was differently and things like that, firstly, our team went to visit them. Right, which apparently that was relatively rare. They're like, oh wow, you're actually coming to visit, and stayed there for several days, took them out. We went out for meals and things like that, and like really showed them that we care. I mentioned ScreenCloud together. When we did our very first ScreenCloud together, we invited them. They were part of it, right? They were not. It's like they were not treated as outsourced. They were treated as us, and I think that they felt that and felt that was authentic, and that's how we dealt with that. Yeah, and I think also I think the team spent a lot of time trying to almost get them to unlearn some of the bad things that had maybe happened in the past to people who, because again, a lot of people are going to be outsourcing because they don't have technical background and technical expertise. We're like, look, we are technical, we get it. We want to do this better. And I think we did put time into trying to educate them. We never really saw them as a temporary fix. We were dedicated to continuing with them. I think overall, in the end, it just didn't make sense. Once we'd really built up our in-house resourcing, it was clear that culturally it was better for us to do it ourselves after a couple of years. But we always maintained good relationships, and we were always really open with the feedback. And again, we would do things like, we do internal, reviews of progress. We would review them too, right? So in effect, the whole idea that this is outsourced, you just sort of forget about that. And the sooner you forget about that, the better. And if you always go in thinking this is a transactional relationship, then don't be surprised when people treat you transactionally.
Definitely. Are there specific regions or countries that you find particularly promising for tech talent?
I haven't really, obviously, I can't talk about every region in the world because I don't have experience. Obviously, there's a vast amount of tech talent in India, for example, and we actually have quite a large number of Indian nationals working in our Bangkok team, but I've never had a team in India. So I don't know. I mean, I know it's pretty big and stuff like that. I've obviously had experience in Ukraine through personal relationships. I've also experienced teams in Bulgaria. I think there's a very interesting kind of Eastern European skill range there. And I think a lot of that comes from a much more sort of rigorous academic upbringing, especially in maths and science, which we don't have so much in the UK and America, I think. So I think that there's just people are naturally kind of more technically minded because of the way that they're educated. I think the education system in the East, from what I can tell, and I think I can talk to that relatively, as an outsider, I'm very impressed. And I wish we had more of that here. I wish we had more emphasis on science and key skills like maths, which we let go way too easily. I think there's just obvious talent there. And then, I think you've also got to be honest. It's coming from countries where this is a very good route towards making more money, right? That is useful and powerful. And I think IT outsourcing is quite possible. There's other skills that wouldn't be so easy to outsource, such as sales, right, for example. So, yeah, I guess Eastern Europe lends itself to that. I'm hearing a lot of US companies of having great success in South America, Latin America. But I can only really talk from my own experiences. But I think the world is full of much more talent than maybe a lot of the West realizes. And I think being able to kind of embrace that, I think it's good for everyone if we really embrace the talent that's available in the world and use it more.
How do you see the role of IT outsourcing evolving in the tech industry, especially with AI?
How do I see it evolving? It's not something I think about too much, so I'm not sure you're going to get a great answer out of me. I think with AI, it means that the negative part of AI means you're not going to need as many people, right? So that's probably quite bad for developing countries. I mean, I think it's super interesting, say in Nigeria, it's having a population explosion. There's a lot of talent there. Time zone's quite good. This could be its time, but then it might be that actually you don't need 100 people. You just need 10 who really understand how to use AI very, very well. And so that might be a bit of a negative to people trying to get into the industry. So we'll see. Yeah, I suppose to a degree, AI might become your outsource. If you know what you're doing, if you have the skills to do it. But I think in technology, we forget that we are still the minority, right? Out in the real world, there are not that many people who really know how to code. There are not that many people really confident with building web products. And so even if they had AI to do it for them, they wouldn't even know where to begin. So I think, and there's many problems that need to be solved. And some of those problems are really small problems that don't warrant a whole SaaS product. But if someone was available to kind of just use AI to spin up and build a product, we've actually just done it recently in ScreenCloud. We had one of our customer success team build an app on top of ScreenCloud for an events company in 2 weeks. And admittedly, one of our front-end developers helped a bit, but the majority of the code was developed through AI and prompting. He's a technical-minded guy, but he's not a developer. I think that's pretty cool. Where that affects outsourcing, you're definitely going to need less people. So possibly that's a problem. But then I also think that people who are coming from kind of up and coming countries, they're pretty resourceful and they're not dumb. Like, they're going to see that this AI is happening. So right now, maybe they're upskilling themselves on how to use AI and prompt, and they could be efficiency machines. So ultimately, I'm very optimistic. Smart people always find a way. But I think AI is going to have an impact on the number of people you need, and probably the companies need to get ahead of that idea and mitigate for that.
Mark, thanks for your time. Thanks for joining me today. It was an amazing conversation, and I was very positively surprised of some of the things you mentioned. Good to know them. I'm sure my audience will find it useful.
Thank you very much. Well, I hope it was useful, and if anything, even if they disagree with something I've said, it's good, right? Like, no one knows what the future really holds. So think about it, talk about it, and then just do something.
If you enjoy our discussion and want to stay updated on future episodes, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way you will not miss out on the latest insights and conversations from the Devico Breakfast Bar. See you in the next episode.